I'll seek you out, flay you alive.
Hey guys, Pogo here, and welcome to the next episode of BanManagement. In this episode, we are going to create the Web API. The Web API will be used by both the website and the Bucket plugin to communicate with the database, to change information and receive information. So we're going to go ahead and write that today. I have the web project set up, and we haven't written the actual website yet, which we will do soon, but we're going to do the API for now. I'm going to go ahead and create a folder called API. We're just going to group everything in the API together under one folder to keep everything nice and organized. And under there, we're going to create a file called api.php. Now, this API file, this api.php, is going to contain all of the functions that we will do with the database. That's going to be adding a ban, removing a ban, or getting information about a ban. So it's going to have those three things. But this is going to be private to us. It'll be accessible by the website that we have running, because this API is running in the exact same place as the website once we write the website. But for the Bucket plugin that wants to access it remotely, we're going to expose a couple of files that correspond with the different functions. Now, in order to keep this secure, we're going to have a key. The key can be whatever you want, but it will be used on both the website and the Bucket plugin. And what will happen is whenever a remote request is sent in, with one of the files that we're going to create, whenever someone tries to do something with them, we're going to make sure that the key that they give us matches the key that we have here. Because if someone's banned on a server with BanManagement and they happen to know how it works because they watched this video, they could easily just, use the remove.php file to unban themselves. And we obviously don't want that. So the key is kind of like a password. And the Bucket plugin will automatically include the password with every request that it sends. And up here we're going to check to make sure that the password is correct in order to allow the request through for security. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to define a constant, which we'll call key, and we'll set the value equal to key. And we're going to say we will do this, make key customizable. So we'll either have like a web interface where you can type in the key, or we'll have a file, some way that we will save the key information. I guess it'll be in a file, but we haven't gone over files in PHP, so we will do that eventually. That key is not going to be used in this API file because we don't need it for any of the functions in here, but we're going to write a couple of files that will use it, and it's nice to have it as a constant instead of having to redefine it in every single file and reread it from a file and all of that stuff. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to write a function that will get us MySQL. Everything that we do with the API is going to have to do with our MySQL database, so this function will easily be able to get us an instance of MySQL that we can use to execute queries. Now, I haven't gone over this in a PHP tutorial outside of this, but it's really not terribly hard, and I will make a more in-depth video eventually. So we're going to create a variable called MySQL, and we're going to create a new instance of the MySQLi class. And you'll notice that the parameters are host, username, password, DB name, port, and socket. We only care about the first four, but if you have a custom port, you can type it in. I believe the default is 3306, and that's what I'm using. So the first parameter is the host. And the host is going to be wherever your wherever your MySQL database is being hosted. Now, I have this DigitalOcean thing set up, so that is going to be the IP address of the DigitalOcean server. If you have this running somewhere else, you would put in that IP address. Also, if you have it running, on your website, whatever .com, you could just type in the URL if it's running there. The next thing it's going to need is the username and the password. The username is going to be root, and the password is going to be whatever password you chose. And I'll type in my password before we test this, but I'm not going to show it to all of you. Finally, the database name. We named our database BanManagement. BanManagement. Okay. So what this will do is it'll connect to the MySQL database hosted at that IP address. It'll log in using the username and password that I gave it, and it will use the BanManagement database. And if we take a look, we know that we have the BanManagement database set up, which has our tables, or our one table called bans. So now we can access the bans table. Before we do, we just want to quickly say that if MySQL had a connection error, we want to die with that connection error. That just means, if it was unable to connect, then we don't want to continue with the page. We want to just stop it there. And then we're just going to return the MySQL. So now when we invoke this getMySQL function, it should return an instance of MySQL. And I've never had a problem with a connection error unless, the server is not running, or wherever this API.php file is, maybe it can't connect to the internet for some reason. That's the only way that you would have an issue. Now that we can access MySQL, we're going to write 3 functions that will do the stuff that we need to do. We're going to first do the function called add. And the add function is going to take in the UUID and the reason, and it's going to add a new entry. Now if we look at our bans table, it has the ID, which is auto increment, so we don't need to worry about it. It's just automatically going to be given a value. So no need to worry about it. We're going to ignore it. UUID is the UUID of the player, and that's obviously going to be different for every entry, so we need to know that. The date, which is a date time, is just going to be the current date. There isn't a reason why it would need to be some other date, so that's just what we'll do. The server will insert the current date. And reason is going to be the text, and that is also a parameter that we need to know. So let's go ahead and get an instance of MySQL, and from there we will use the query function where we type in our MySQL query and it will execute it for us. The query that we're going to use here is we're going to say, this is going to be adding, so we're going to write insert into, then the name of the table, which is bans. And I know that you guys might not know the syntax for MySQL, and I will go over it in a future video, but just stick with me for now. So what's the data that we want to insert into bans? Well, we don't want to insert the ID because MySQL will do that for us, but these other 3 things we do. So UUID, date, and reason. These 3 things we want to insert. Then we're going to say for those things, the values we're going to give them are, and now we're going to give them the values. Every value that we give in this case is going to be in single quotes. When you're giving some kind of like a string or some text, it's going to be in quotes. The only time you would not use quotes if you're doing a Boolean true or false or a number or whatever. But otherwise, like UUID, we're going to put UUID in quotes, and we're going to use the variable UUID. Then we're going to do the date, which we'll do in 1 second. And then we're going to do the reason, which is also going to be in double quotes. Now, for the date we can use the PHP date function, and date takes in the format. The format is going to be year, month, day, and then hours, minutes, seconds. So I believe that's the correct format. If not, we can fix it. But it'll be the current year, dash, current month, dash, current day, and then hours, colon, minutes, colon, seconds. So that'll be the date and time of this ban, and that will go into the database. That's all we need to do for adding. We can now successfully add something if we call this function. Next function we're going to do is remove, or we'll call it delete to go better with PHP. So this function, I'm sorry, I think delete might be a reserved name. We'll just call it remove. And this is just going to take in the UUID, and it's going to remove the bands for that UUID. So we're going to say get MySQL, and then we're going to query, and we're going to say delete from, and then the table is bands, then the condition where UUID is equal to $UUID. So it's going to go into this bands table, and it's going to go through each entry, and it's going to say if that UUID value is equal to this given UUID, then it'll remove it. So theoretically, if the user has 10 bands under their name, it'll remove all 10, but they're only really ever going to have one band, so we're not going to worry. This is just going to delete from the table bands where the UUID matches the one that we want. Now this one's going to be a little bit more complicated. This is going to be called get. This is going to get the information from the database, and it's going to take in the UUID as its parameter. So given a UUID, it's going to give us the information from the database. So we'll go ahead and say this time we are going to store the data. We will say $result. We're going to store this to the variable result. So we're going to say result is equal to get MySQL, and we're going to query. We're going to say select everything from the table bands where UUID is equal to the UUID. So it's going to go into the bands table, and it's going to select all of the columns, the ID, UUID, date, and reason, from that where the UUID matches the given UUID. So that'll give us the data. Then we're going to call the fetch associative, or ASSOC, function, and that is going to return an array that contains all of the data. ID, UUID, date, and reason. We are then going to say $data is equal to, we're going to create a new, or I'm sorry, we don't even need to do that. We can just say return, or we can make it really simple. We can just say return that. So what it's going to do is it's going to get all of this data, and it's going to put it into an associative array, so it'll have values like ID, 0, UUID, whatever, date, whatever the date is, reason you have been banned. And it's going to put it into an array, and it will return it for us. And that should be okay. Alright, so now we have the add, remove, and get functions ready. We can use these on our website, and let's just go ahead and look at that first. We're going to create a file called test, and this is not going to be in the API directory, it's going to be in the root directory. So we're just going to test and see whether we can invoke all of these different functions in a website. So this will be just like our website. And the first thing we're going to say is we're going to require API/API.php. So what we're saying is we're requiring that we have this API.php file, and therefore we will have this file. What we're going to do is we're first going to say add, and you'll notice that the add shows up just like the add that we wrote, because by requiring the API.php file, we basically inherit all of these, not inherit, but we get access to all of these functions. So we're going to add the UUID of --, and the reason is going to be you have been banned. So theoretically, after this runs, it will have inserted a entry into the database. We're then going to use var dump because we're using an array, and we're going to say get for the UUID of --. So since we just added the entry, it will have this entry. So this get function should return the data. It should return the ID, the UUID, which we know, the date, whatever the current date was when that happened, and then the message. Finally, we'll go ahead and remove that UUID, and then we'll check the database to make sure that it's gone. So let's go ahead and open up the test.php page in our browser. And oh yeah, I have to configure the PHP interpreter. Okay, now let's reload it. And no, we don't want to add that. And connection refused, that's right, I forgot. I forgot to put in my password. So let me just pause the video and type that in. I just put in my password, and now we will reload. Still saying connection refused, line 5. Let me just take my password out and take a look. So I figured out the issue. The problem is that MySQL servers by default are secure, and they don't allow remote connections. So when I was running this on my computer right here, and I was trying to connect to the server remotely, it was not allowing me in because, I was connecting from elsewhere. What I had to do in order to fix this was I had to upload these files to the actual DigitalOcean server, and once I did, I access it by going to the IP address /test.php. So I typed in localhost here so that it would connect to the local server, and then it logs in and everything will work. So you're either going to need to allow remote connections on your on your MySQL database, or you should do the safer thing and just host them both at the same place. And it really makes sense because this API that we're making allows, other places, other, users to access the information without directly accessing the database. So that's the whole point of this API, is to make everything accessible without directly accessing the database. So you're going to want to store MySQL and your website on the exact same place so that you can keep your server protected, so that you can only access it locally, but then expose functions that allow you to access remotely. So that's the problem. I changed it to localhost right here, and now I have it running on the remote server /test.php. You'll see that it gave us an array of size 4 where the ID is equal to 1, generated the ID 1. The UUID is .. which is exactly what we typed in. The date does not appear to have worked correctly, so we'll take a look at that. And then the reason says you have been banned, which is what we wrote here. So it first added that, then it got it again. So that time it didn't just take the result of add and print it. It actually got it again given the UUID. And then let's make sure that it removed correctly. We'll just say select everything from bans. And you'll see, we have to select our database. Use BanManagement. I can't type right now. And now we'll select everything, and you'll see it says empty set. There's nothing in there. We clearly added something, and then we got the information, but this remove also worked because now it's empty. It got rid of that one result. So, there we go. That is proof that the website that we're going to write has access to the database. Now we'll go ahead and expose the add, remove, and get functions to the public as long as they have a key. So we'll go ahead and write add the add class, or not class, the add file. We're first going to require the API.php file because we're going to be using some things from that. Now, we're going to take all of the arguments as post arguments. I went over this before, but the difference between get and post is get is exposed in the URL, post is not. Since we're going to be sending this key, we just want to keep it safer, and let's just keep all the information inside of post. It really doesn't make a difference to us, but it's just a little bit more secure, so we might as well. We'll go ahead and make sure, first we're going to say if we're going to get the post variable called key, and we're going to say if it's not set, if there is no key specified, or the key that was given to us is not equal to the key constant that we made. So if they didn't give us a key or the key is wrong, we're going to die saying invalid key, or really incorrect key. We're just not going to let this happen. That's our security right there. Otherwise, we can just assume that it's fine, and we'll go ahead and add the post argument called UUID and the post argument called reason. So what this will do is it'll, verify the key, and then it'll add the UUID and reason. So whenever we call this, we're going to give key, UUID, and reason as post arguments when we call add.php. Now we'll go ahead and do remove.php, and remove just takes the UUID. So we're just going to say remove the UUID like that. And that's the correct remove. So the only thing we needed to change was we're calling remove instead of add. Finally, we're going to do the get.php. Get is going to do pretty much the same thing, but we're going to echo the result of get given the UUID. So when we call this, it's going to echo it out so that in our Java plugin we can read in the data that is echoed out, and then that will be the data that we're going to use. So once we have the logic written in the API file, it makes it pretty simple to write these three functions that are exposed. So if you're going to be doing something with the database remotely, like with the bucket plugin, you can use remove, get, and add these three PHP files by supplying the correct post arguments. You'll be fine there. So that is all for this video. We created the web API that communicates with the database. We exposed the add, remove, and get functions as PHP files so they can be retrieved from Java or from other sources if you make maybe an app or whatever that would work with BanManagement. And we also showed how the website that we're going to make can easily access the get, add, and remove functions that we wrote. So when we write the website where you can, get information, add bans and remove bans, it'll be nice and simple to do that. So as always, subscribe if you want to see more, comment with what you want to learn. If you like this video, click the like button, and I'll see you guys soon with some more coding. Bye for now.